The forest at night was a cathedral of shadows. Ancient branches intertwined overhead like the gnarled fingers of conspirators plotting through the centuries. When the wind stirred, dried leaves rustled with a sound that seemed almost like whispered warnings, as if the forest itself was alive and watching. The moon hung halfway between full and dark, playing hide-and-seek behind restless clouds that drifted across the sky like phantom ships. On the ground below, long shadows stretched and twisted, creating patterns that resembled pages torn from some horrific illustrated manuscript of forgotten nightmares. Commander Ibrahim Tarore adjusted the collar of his weathered field jacket against the chill night air. His fingers moved automatically to check the weight of the rifle slung across his broad shoulders, redistributing its familiar burden. Each step he took was measured and deliberate, the product of years of military training that had taught him to move through hostile territory like a ghost. His boots made almost no sound on the carpet of dead leaves beneath his feet. For a fleeting moment, Ibrahim thought he heard something, a distant sound that made his blood run cold. It was faint, barely audible over the whisper of wind through branches, but unmistakable. The muffled sound of a child crying, the soft whimpering of someone trying desperately not to be heard. His hand instinctively moved toward his rifle, every sense suddenly on high alert. But just as quickly as the sound had come, it was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest, leaving him to wonder if he had imagined it. Suddenly, without warning, the bushes to his right erupted in movement. In one fluid motion, born of countless combat situations, Ibrahim brought his rifle to bear on the disturbance. His finger rested lightly on the trigger guard, ready but not yet committed. Years of experience had taught him the difference between a genuine threat and a false alarm, and right now he wasn't sure which this was. A bird burst from the dense foliage, its wings beating frantically against the night air. Ibrahim's finger relaxed slightly, just another frightened creature of the forest. But then something happened that made him question his sanity, made him wonder if the stress of the mission had finally pushed him beyond the breaking point. The parrot's eyes gleamed with an intelligence that seemed impossible for any animal. It tilted its head, fixing Ibrahim with an unnervingly human gaze, and then it spoke. Not the mindless mimicry of a trained bird, but clear, purposeful words spoken with unmistakable urgency. "Don't shoot! There's no time to waste." Ibrahim blinked hard, certain he must be hallucinating. Perhaps he had been exposed to some kind of chemical weapon, or maybe the lack of sleep over the past 72 hours was finally catching up with him. A smile, half amused, half bewildered, touched his lips for a moment before suspicion clouded his features. He studied the bird with narrowed eyes, his military training screaming at him that this was impossible, that talking parrots only existed in children's stories and hallucinations. "Can you actually speak?" His voice was low but carried an edge of steel, the tone of a man who had seen too much to be easily fooled, but who was open-minded enough not to dismiss what his senses told him without investigation. The parrot settled on a nearby branch with surprising grace, shaking its colorful plumage before fixing Ibrahim with that same disturbingly intelligent gaze. "I'm not here for conversation," its beak clicking with what might have been impatience. "I'm here to warn you. If you don't follow me right now, this very instant, 50 children will die before sunrise. Their blood will be on both our hands." Ibrahim took a deep breath, trying to process what he was experiencing. A soldier, especially a commander, learned to trust his instincts, to read situations quickly and make life-and-death decisions in seconds. But those same instincts were now at war with each other. Everything in his training told him this was absurd, possibly a trap. Yet something in the parrot's manner, and the urgency of its message rang with terrible sincerity. "You think I'm some kind of fool?" Ibrahim's hand remained on his rifle, his body tense and ready for whatever might come next. The parrot made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh, it was hard to tell. "Think what you like. Call me a madman or a miracle, I don't care. But every second you waste questioning is a second closer those children come to death. They're imprisoned in an old mine shaft, Commander. The enemy has rigged the entire area with landmines and booby traps. Your military expertise and my knowledge of the terrain, we can save them together. Alone, we both fail, and those children die screaming in the dark." Ibrahim scraped the toe of his boot against the ground, creating a small furrow in the dirt as his mind raced through possibilities. His eyes narrowed as he weighed the decision before him. Every instinct honed by years of combat experience told him to be cautious, to verify intelligence before acting. But the same instincts that had kept him alive through countless battles also told him that sometimes the most impossible scenarios contained the most truth. "What if this is a trap?" he said, voicing his doubts aloud. "What if you're some enemy creation, a weapon designed to exploit exactly the kind of emotional vulnerability that stories about endangered children create? What if following you leads me and my men into an ambush?" The parrot lifted its beak toward the sky, where the clouds were beginning to thin, allowing more moonlight to filter through. When it spoke again, its voice carried a weight that seemed far too heavy for such a small creature. "I only know this: time is running out, like sand through an hourglass. Take my word or don't, that's your choice to make. But when the sun rises tomorrow morning, if you've chosen wrong, those 50 children will never see its light. They'll die in the darkness, alone and terrified, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved them." The wind died completely in that moment, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for Ibrahim's decision. The shadows seemed to deepen, the darkness becoming almost tangible. Ibrahim felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a physical force. His military training warred with his humanitarian instincts. Logic battled with intuition. And somewhere in the balance between those opposing forces, he had to find his answer. His heart whispered what his mind was reluctant to acknowledge. This was no ordinary coincidence, no simple chance encounter. The universe, God, fate, whatever name you gave to the mysterious force that occasionally intervened in human affairs, had placed this creature in his path for a reason. To ignore that reason would be to abandon not just 50 children, but his own humanity. Ibrahim's jaw tightened with resolve. He adjusted the rifle on his shoulder, settling it into position with the practiced ease of a man who had carried weapons for so long they had become extensions of his own body. He looked at the parrot with new determination burning in his eyes, and spoke with quiet certainty. "Show me the way. If you're telling the truth, then tonight you and I are partners in the same mission. But if you're lying, if this is some elaborate trap, know this: I won't go down easily, and I'll take as many of the enemy with me as I can." The parrot spread its wings, the colorful feathers catching what little moonlight penetrated the canopy above. Without another word, it launched itself into the air and began flying deeper into the forest, following a path invisible to human eyes. Ibrahim took one last look at the relatively safe clearing behind him, said a silent prayer, and then followed the bird into the dense darkness ahead. The forest's silence swallowed them both, their passage marked only by the soft whisper of wings and the careful tread of military boots on ancient ground. It was as if the earth itself had become complicit in keeping their secret, helping to hide their movements from whatever enemy forces might be watching and waiting in the shadows. The descent into the old tunnel system was like entering another world entirely, one where the normal rules of reality seemed not to apply. The parrot led Ibrahim to what appeared to be nothing more than a small depression in the forest floor, barely visible beneath a thick carpet of moss and dead leaves. But when the parrot pecked at a specific spot and Ibrahim brushed away the organic debris, he discovered a carefully concealed entrance, a dark mouth in the earth that exhaled cold, damp air that smelled of minerals and ages past. "This is the way," the parrot said, perching on a gnarled root near the opening. "An old supply tunnel that leads directly to the mine's interior. The enemy uses it as a smuggling route, but they don't know all its secrets, not like I do." Ibrahim crouched at the entrance, running his hand along the rim of the opening. His fingers came away damp and cold, coated with a layer of slime that spoke of long abandonment. The stones that lined the tunnel entrance were old, far older than any military installation should be. This was no recent excavation, but something that had existed for decades, perhaps even centuries. "This tunnel looks dangerous," Ibrahim observed, his professional assessment of tactical situations kicking in automatically. "If it collapses while we're inside, we'll be buried alive. No one will ever find our bodies." The parrot hopped closer, its small claws gripping the stone with surprising strength. "There's risk, yes, I won't lie to you about that. But those children's lives are also at risk right now, this very moment. They're breathing contaminated air in a sealed chamber, with limited oxygen and no food or water. Every minute that passes reduces their chances of survival. The choice is yours, Commander. You can play it safe and let them die, or you can trust me and give them a fighting chance." Finally, he made his decision. Taking a deep breath of the fresh forest air, knowing it might be his last for some time, Ibrahim checked his rifle one more time, adjusted the small tactical flashlight attached to his vest, and began lowering himself into the tunnel entrance. "Get ready," the parrot called down to him, its voice echoing slightly in the confined space, "because the real story, the real test of who you are, starts right now." The moment Ibrahim entered the tunnel proper, everything changed. The air pressure felt different, heavier somehow, pressing against his eardrums and making him acutely aware of the tons of earth suspended above his head. The smell intensified, not just dampness now, but the odor of decay, of things that had rotted in darkness for far too long. Water dripped steadily from somewhere above, each drop echoing through the passageway with a hollow, lonely sound that made the tunnel feel even more isolated from the world above. The walls were rough-hewn stone, carved by tools that must have been primitive even when they were new. There was no natural light here, no way to see more than a few feet ahead even with his tactical flashlight. The being cut through the darkness like a blade, revealing glimpses of the passage ahead, but somehow making the shadows beyond seem even darker by contrast. The parrot had perched on Ibrahim's shoulder, its claws digging into the fabric of his jacket as it maintained its balance. Every so often it would shake its feathers, as if trying to ward off the oppressive atmosphere of their surroundings. "This place feels ancient," Ibrahim whispered, keeping his voice low despite the apparent emptiness around them. "Are you certain this leads to the mine where the children are held?" The parrot tapped its beak against the wall beside Ibrahim's head, producing a hollow sound that suggested the stone was thinner than it appeared. "This is the route the enemy uses as their secret passage. It's how they've been moving supplies and weapons without being detected. But be warned, just ahead, around the next bend, they have guards posted. We'll need to deal with them quietly if we want to maintain the element of surprise." Ibrahim immediately switched off his flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness. For a moment, the blackness was so complete it felt like a physical presence, as if someone had wrapped a thick cloth around his head. His other senses compensated, becoming more acute. He could hear the sound of his own breathing, the steady drip of water somewhere ahead, and was that voices? He gripped his rifle more tightly and moved forward with exaggerated care, each footstep placed with deliberate precision to avoid making any sound that might alert the guards. The parrot remained absolutely still on his shoulder, barely even breathing, as if it understood the critical importance of silence. As they approached the bend in the tunnel, suddenly light appeared ahead, the flickering glow of flashlights held by guards on patrol. Ibrahim pressed himself against the cold stone wall, hardly daring to breathe, as voices became audible. "The commander said no one gets through this tunnel. Anyone who tries to enter dies. No exceptions. No mercy." "Seems like a waste of time to me," responded another voice, younger and less confident. "No one knows about this entrance except us. We could be sleeping instead of standing here in this God-forsaken hole." "Orders are orders. You want to argue with the commander? Be my guest. I'll be happy to watch him make an example of you." Ibrahim glanced at the parrot, which was watching the guards with eyes that gleamed in the reflected light. The bird leaned close to Ibrahim's ear and whispered so quietly that the words were barely audible. "Now is the time. If we don't act now, we'll be discovered. There's no other way past them." Before Ibrahim could formulate a plan, one of the guards sensed something, perhaps a subtle change in the air currents, or maybe just the intuition that comes from spending too long in dark places. His flashlight beam suddenly swung in their direction, and time seemed to slow down as the light approached Ibrahim's position. "Who's there?" the guard shouted, his voice sharp with alarm. Ibrahim didn't hesitate. Years of combat training took over, his body moving with the practiced efficiency of a professional soldier. He surged forward from the shadows, using the butt of his rifle to strike the first guard's shoulder with precisely calculated force, hard enough to incapacitate, but not to kill. The man crumpled with a grunt of pain. The second guard was reaching for his weapon, his finger moving toward the trigger when the parrot launched itself from Ibrahim's shoulder with startling ferocity. The bird became a whirlwind of beating wings and sharp beak, attacking the guard's face with focused aggression. The man screamed as the parrot's beak struck his eye, causing him to drop his weapon and clutch at his face in agony. Ibrahim took advantage of the distraction, moving in close and pressing the barrel of his rifle against the guard's chest. His voice was hard, carrying the authority of someone who had given similar ultimatums many times before. "Hands up, or this dark tunnel becomes your grave. Choose wisely." The injured guard collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain and clutching his wounded eye. The first guard, still dazed from the blow to his shoulder, slumped against the wall, breathing hard. His hands were shaking, whether from pain, fear, or both. We just follow orders," the guard stammered, his earlier bravado completely gone. "The real mastermind is deeper inside. We're just doing what we're told." Ibrahim grabbed him by his collar, pulling him close enough that the guard could see the cold determination in his eyes. "Then you're going to lead me to that mine. And if you lie to me, if you try to lead me into a trap, your fate will be far worse than your companions. Do we understand each other?" The guard nodded frantically, too frightened to do anything but comply. The parrot flew back to Ibrahim's shoulder, settling itself and speaking in a low voice that somehow managed to convey satisfaction. "That was just the beginning. The enemy's real forces are still waiting ahead. The hard part hasn't even started yet." The silence of the tunnel returned, but now it carried with it the metallic scent of blood and the acrid smell of fear. Ibrahim left the injured guard where he lay. He would survive, but wouldn't be in any condition to raise an alarm, and pushed the other guard forward into the darkness ahead. This was no longer just a journey through underground passages. This was the beginning of a war, a battle fought in shadows where darkness and light would both be tested, where the price of failure would be measured in the lives of innocent children. As they progressed deeper into the tunnel system, Ibrahim began to notice subtle changes in their surroundings. The rough stone walls gradually gave way to something more deliberately constructed. Metal panels began appearing, reinforcing the passages in a way that spoke of military engineering rather than natural cave formation. This was not just an old mine that had been repurposed. This was a facility that had been systematically converted into a hidden fortress, probably over the course of many years. Rusty pipes and corroded electrical cables hung from the ceiling, creating an obstacle course of dangling hazards that Ibrahim had to navigate carefully in the dim light. The air itself changed, taking on the smell of burnt oil mixed with the distinctive odor of rusting metal. Scents that spoke of machinery and human habitation, of a space that had been actively used for purposes far removed from simple mining. Ibrahim ran his hand along one of the metal panels, feeling the texture of oxidation and accumulated grime beneath his fingers. He paused, studying the construction with a professional eye, and spoke quietly. "This is not a natural tunnel system. Someone has done extensive work here, turned this into something deliberately hidden. This level of construction would have taken months, maybe years." The parrot, which had been flying ahead to scout the path, returned and used its beak to scratch at something on the wall. As dust and grime fell away, old lettering became visible. Mine Shaft 7, authorized personnel only, entry prohibited. "This is it," the parrot said, tapping its beak against the sign for emphasis. "This passage leads directly to the central chamber of the mine complex. The enemy has made this their primary hiding place, their base of operations." Ibrahim gestured for the captured guard to keep moving forward. The man shuffled ahead with hesitant steps, clearly terrified of what they might encounter. After another 50 yards, the narrow tunnel opened into a chamber that made Ibrahim's breath catch in his throat. The room was like something from a spy thriller. The walls were covered with maps, some old and yellowed with age, others clearly recent satellite imagery. Diagrams and schematics were pinned haphazardly to every available surface. When Ibrahim swept his tactical light across the space, he could hardly believe what he was seeing. A large table dominated the center of the room, its surface buried under documents and plans. Ibrahim approached cautiously, scanning the materials with growing alarm. There were detailed schematics of modern weapons, blueprints for explosive devices, and, most chilling of all, a handwritten ledger that listed the names and ages of children, along with notations about their locations and status. Ibrahim picked up one particular document, his hands beginning to tremble as he read. His jaw clenched with barely controlled rage as the implications became clear. He turned to the guard, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "How long has this operation been in planning? Who is the mastermind behind all of this?" The guard was sweating profusely despite the cool temperature in the underground chamber. "I swear, I'm just a guard. I only know what I'm told. The master's orders are absolute. No one is to leave with those children alive. That's all I know. I swear it on my life." The parrot made a sharp chirping sound and gestured with its beak toward another part of the room. Ibrahim moved closer and found himself looking at a detailed diagram of the mine's interior layout. What he saw made his blood run cold. The entire underground complex was a death trap, The diagram showed an elaborate network of explosive devices, all interconnected, all designed to bring the entire structure down if triggered. The children weren't just imprisoned, they were being held in what was essentially a massive barn. "This isn't just a prison," Ibrahim said, his voice heavy with the weight of realization. "This is a grave, already dug and waiting to be filled. If we don't move quickly, everything, everyone will be destroyed." The parrot made a sharp chirping sound and gestured with its beak toward another part of the room. Ibrahim moved closer and found himself looking at a detailed diagram of the mine's interior layout. What he saw made his blood run cold. "There's something else you need to see. Look under the table." Ibrahim knelt down and his heart sank even further. There, partially hidden in shadow, was a metal container roughly the size of a briefcase. A digital timer was mounted on its surface, red LED numbers counting down with remorseless precision. As Ibrahim watched, another second ticked away, then another. Time was not on their side. They had mere hours before whatever was in that case would detonate, likely triggering a chain reaction that would collapse the entire mine system. This is their endgame, Ibrahim felt his mouth go dry. They're counting on fear to paralyze anyone who tries to rescue those children. If this device detonates, it won't matter if we've found them or not. Everything in this mine will be buried under tons of rock and earth. The evidence, the children, us, all of it will be entombed forever. He grabbed the guard by the front of his shirt and pulled him close, his voice carrying unmistakable menace. "You're going to show me every passage, every room, every trap between here and those children. And if you lie, if you try to lead us into an ambush, I will make certain your death is neither quick nor easy. Do we understand each other?" The guard nodded frantically, words tumbling out in a rush of fear-driven cooperation. "I'll take you there, but I'm warning you, the path is filled with traps at every turn. One wrong step and we all die. The master made sure of that." The parrot returned to Ibrahim's shoulder, its voice quiet but firm. "From this point forward, your expertise is what will keep us alive. Every wire, every trigger, every subtle sign of danger, reading them correctly is now your responsibility. I can tell you where to look, but only you have the knowledge to interpret what we find." A heavy silence fell over the underground chamber. The red light on the timer blinked with mechanical regularity, each flash a reminder that time was their enemy now. Ibrahim stood still for a moment, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He had faced death before. Every soldier had. But this was different. This wasn't just his life on the line. 50 innocent lives hung in the balance, depending entirely on his knowledge, his skill, his ability to stay calm under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Ibrahim closed his eyes for just a second, centering himself, finding that quiet place of focus that had sustained him through countless dangerous missions. When he opened them again, his gaze was clear, his purpose absolute. "Then we move forward," he said simply, "and we don't stop until those children are free or we're dead. There is no middle ground, no acceptable compromise. We succeed or we die trying." The digital display showed 2 hours and 17 minutes remaining. 2 hours and 17 minutes before 50 children died, before Ibrahim's mission ended in catastrophic failure, before a carefully planned atrocity became reality. Ibrahim pushed the table aside with barely controlled violence, revealing the full extent of the explosive device. He dropped to his knees, setting his tactical light on the floor and clamping it between his teeth to keep both hands free. Sweat beaded on his forehead and ran down his neck despite the cool underground air. "How much time?" he asked, through clenched teeth, his words slightly distorted by the flashlight in his mouth. The parrot leaned close to read the display. 2 hours and some minutes. But this isn't a standalone device. It's the master trigger. There's an entire network of explosives throughout the tunnel system, all linked to this central timer. One mistake, one wrong wire cut, and the entire sequence accelerates. We could trigger an immediate detonation. Ibrahim examined the device with the careful attention of someone who had received extensive training in explosive ordnance disposal. The metal case contained a nightmare of multicolored wires, red, blue, yellow, and green, all connecting to various circuit boards and components he couldn't immediately identify. He carefully removed the outer cover, revealing the intricate interior mechanisms. Small circuits gleamed in the flashlight's beam, looking deceptively delicate for something capable of such massive destruction. "This is no amateur improvised device," Ibrahim muttered, his words barely audible. "This was built by an expert, someone with sophisticated knowledge of explosive systems and fail-safe mechanisms." The guard was pressed against the wall, shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. Fear had reduced his voice to a whispery croak. "I told you this wasn't a game. One wrong move and none of us will leave this place alive." Ibrahim shot him a sharp glance. "Shut up. Fear weakens judgment, and right now I need absolute focus." The parrot hopped from his shoulder onto the edge of the table, positioning itself where it could see both the device and Ibrahim's face. "Listen carefully. The red wire is a false choice. It's designed to look like the primary trigger, but it's actually a trap. Cut the red wire and the timer accelerates, giving us only minutes instead of hours. The blue wire is connected to the yellow one in a series circuit. You need to disconnect the yellow first, then the blue." Ibrahim's hands were steady despite the pressure, the product of countless hours of training and real-world experience under fire. But sweat made his fingers slippery, and he had to wipe them on his pants before reaching for the wire cutters in his tactical kit. He identified the yellow wire, tracing its path through the circuit to verify what the parrot had told him. Everything checked out according to his understanding of explosive devices. Taking a slow, controlled breath, he positioned the cutters around the yellow wire. "Here goes everything," he whispered, and applied pressure. The wire separated with a tiny snapping sound that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the lights on the device flickered, and the timer's counting suddenly accelerated. Numbers rolling past too fast to read clearly. The guard screamed and covered his head, certain they were about to die. But then, as quickly as it had sped up, the timer returned to its normal pace. In fact, it seemed to pause for a moment before resuming its countdown at the previous rate. "You did it right," the parrot said, its voice carrying relief. "Now the blue wire, but be very careful. This one is more firmly anchored. Don't rush. Steady pressure is better than a jerky cut." Ibrahim positioned the cutters around the blue wire. His hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through his system. The timer showed less than 2 hours remaining. Every second counted. He made the cut in one smooth motion. A small spark jumped from the device, making him flinch back involuntarily. For several heartbeats that felt like hours, nothing else happened. Then the timer stopped. The LED display went dark. The soft humming sound that had been emanating from the device cut off abruptly, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt almost sacred. Ibrahim sat back on his heels, pulling the flashlight from his mouth and taking several deep, shuddering breaths. His hands were shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed, the body's natural response to extreme stress. "That's one bomb neutralized," he said, his voice hoarse. "But if this is the master control, that means there are others scattered throughout the complex, all still active and probably counting down on their own independent timers." The guard, still trembling, spoke with a mixture of awe and terror. "You did the impossible. No one thought those devices could be disarmed. The master said they were foolproof. The parrot ruffled its feathers and fixed the guard with a stern look. Nothing created by humans is foolproof. Every system has its weakness, every plan its flaw. The master's arrogance will be their downfall. Ibrahim stood up, retrieving his rifle and slinging it back across his shoulder. He carefully placed the deactivated bomb's outer casing in his pack. It might contain evidence useful for later investigation. If I disarmed one, I can disarm the others, but each one we encounter is a race against time. The enemy will notice eventually that the master control has been disabled. When they do, they might manually trigger the remaining explosives. The parrot returned to his shoulder, its voice carrying grim determination. Then we move fast. The children are still in a cage, still surrounded by death. And somewhere ahead, the people responsible for all this are waiting, probably expecting us to either die in the traps or retreat in fear. Ibrahim checked his rifle one more time, verified that his remaining ammunition was secure, and nodded grimly. Then let's keep them waiting. Every second we waste is a second closer those children come to disaster. The chamber fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the oppressive weight of impending doom, but the focused quiet of warriors preparing for battle. The red light from the deactivated timer no longer blinked its ominous countdown, but Ibrahim knew that other timers were still active elsewhere in the complex. They had won one battle against time and technology, but the war was far from over, and the hardest challenges still lay ahead in the darkness of the abandoned mine. Emerging from the narrow supply tunnel, they entered a vast underground chamber that took Ibrahim's breath away. This was no rough mine shaft or hastily converted storage area. This was a space that had been deliberately excavated and reinforced, transformed into something approaching an underground fortress. The ceiling soared at least 40 feet overhead, disappearing into shadows that even the scattered torchlight couldn't fully penetrate. The walls showed signs of professional engineering: support beams, reinforced concrete in places, ventilation shafts that carried the faint whisper of air movement from somewhere above. But what dominated Ibrahim's attention wasn't the architecture. It was the armed men positioned throughout the chamber, their weapons gleaming in the torchlight, their faces showing a mixture of confidence and cruel amusement. They had been waiting. They had known someone would come. At the far end of the chamber, behind a barred door set into the stone wall, Ibrahim could see the children. 50 young faces, some barely visible in the dim light, huddled together for comfort and warmth. They were alive. That was the most important thing. But they looked weak, frightened, and malnourished. The enemy commander stepped forward from the ranks of his men. He was a tall man with a bearing that spoke of military training, though his allegiances had clearly been sold to the highest bidder long ago. His uniform was dusty and stained, but his eyes carried the sharp calculation of someone who had orchestrated this entire operation. "So you actually made it," the commander said, his voice echoing through the chamber with mocking amusement. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. The tunnel traps, the guards, the explosive devices, you overcame them all. But your journey ends here, Commander Tarore. Both you and those children will die in this chamber. No one is leaving this mine alive." Ibrahim stepped forward, his rifle held in a ready position, but not yet aimed at any specific target. The parrot remained on his shoulder, its eyes tracking the movements of the armed men with predatory focus. "The only thing ending here tonight is your operation," Ibrahim said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Those children have committed no crime, except being in the wrong place when monsters like you decided to use them as pawns. If I die trying to save them, at least I die with honor, something you abandoned long ago." The enemy commander laughed, a harsh sound that carried no real humor. "Honor? What naive idealism! Honor doesn't pay for weapons, Commander. Honor doesn't fund operations or buy loyalty. Only money does that, and the people I work for have plenty of it." Ibrahim's response was to raise his rifle and fire a single, precise shot. The bullet struck the ground inches from the enemy commander's feet, sending up a spray of stone chips. The message was clear. The talking was over. What followed was chaos. The chamber exploded into violence as both sides opened fire simultaneously. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like lightning, the thunderous reports of gunfire echoing off the stone walls until the sound became nearly unbearable. The children screamed behind their barred door, pressing themselves against the far wall in terror. Ibrahim dove behind a large piece of mining equipment, using it as cover while he returned fire. His shots were measured and precise. Years of combat experience had taught him not to waste ammunition in situations like this. Each bullet had to count. Each trigger pull had to have maximum effect. The Parrot took to the air, becoming a difficult target as it swooped and darted through the chaos. But rather than fleeing to safety, it used its aerial vantage point to call out enemy positions to Ibrahim. "3 more on your right, behind the support pillars," the Parrot shrieked above the gunfire. "2 more trying to flank you from the left side." Ibrahim shifted his position, acquired his targets, and fired. 2 enemy fighters went down. But more kept coming, appearing from doorways and passages throughout the chamber. The enemy commander had clearly assembled a substantial force, and they were all converging on Ibrahim's position. The captured guard, who had been cowering during the initial exchange of fire, suddenly found his courage, or perhaps just his will to survive. He scrambled to Ibrahim's side and picked up a fallen enemy weapon. "We're outnumbered at least 3 to 1, he shouted over the cacophony of battle. "This is suicide. We need to retreat while we still can." "Retreat?" Ibrahim's voice was fierce, almost savage. "And leave those children to die? Never. If I wanted to play it safe, I never would have entered this damned mine in the first place. We finish this, one way or another." A massive explosion suddenly rocked the chamber. One of the enemy fighters had activated a device planted near the entrance they had used. Whether intentionally or accidentally, Ibrahim couldn't tell. The detonation brought down a section of the tunnel behind them, blocking that exit in a cloud of dust and falling rock. The enemy commander's voice rang out through the chaos. "Now you truly have nowhere to run. This chamber becomes your tomb." But the explosion had unintended consequences. The Parrot, circling overhead, spotted something the enemy commander had missed. A section of the ceiling support structure had been damaged by the blast, and one particular beam was now hanging precariously, held in place only by a single chain that was visibly straining under the weight. "Ibrahim, look up!" the Parrot screamed, diving down toward him. "That support beam! If you can shoot through the chain, the whole structure will collapse on the enemy position!" Ibrahim didn't hesitate. He rolled out from behind his cover, drew a bead on the chain, despite the bullet striking around him, and fired. Once, twice, 3 times. The chain snapped with a metallic scream, and several tons of rock and timber came crashing down. The enemy fighters scattered, but not quickly enough. At least 6 men were caught in the collapse, their screams cut short by the crushing weight. In the confusion that followed, Ibrahim seized his opportunity. He sprinted across the open chamber floor, zigzagging to present a harder target, bullets kicking up stone fragments around his feet. The guard followed, firing wildly to provide covering fire. They reached a large boulder near the center of the chamber and threw themselves behind it. From this new position, Ibrahim could see the entire layout of the enemy forces, and more importantly, he could see a clear path to the children's prison. "We need to reach that door," he gasped. checking his remaining ammunition. He was running low, perhaps only 2 magazines left. "How many more are there?" The Parrot landed beside him, breathing hard. "I count at least 15 still combat capable, but their commander is rallying them. We don't have much time before they organize a coordinated assault." As if to confirm the Parrot's assessment, the enemy commander's voice rang out once more. "Cease random fire. Form up and advance in formation. I want him alive if possible. I want him to watch those children die before we kill him." Ibrahim's jaw clenched. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. He was outnumbered, low on ammunition, and the enemy was about to launch a concentrated attack. In a few minutes, it would all be over. But then something unexpected happened. From somewhere deeper in the mine complex, a different sound echoed through the passages. The distinctive crack of military-grade rifles, firing in disciplined volleys rather than the scattered shots of the enemy forces. And then came voices, shouting in the clear, crisp cadences of trained soldiers. Reinforcements had arrived. Ibrahim didn't know who had sent them or how they had found this place, but in that moment it didn't matter. What mattered was that the odds had suddenly shifted. The enemy commander heard it too. His confident expression crumbled into something approaching panic. "Impossible! How did they—" He never finished the sentence. The new arrivals burst into the chamber from 3 different passages simultaneously, a coordinated assault that spoke of professional military training. They were Ibrahim's own forces, a rescue team that had been tracking his position through a locator beacon he had activated hours earlier as a contingency measure. Caught between Ibrahim's position and the new arrivals, the enemy forces collapsed. Some threw down their weapons immediately, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. Others tried to fight and were quickly overwhelmed. The enemy commander himself attempted to flee through a side passage, but was tackled by 2 soldiers before he made it 10 feet. Within minutes, the battle was over. The chamber fell silent except for the moans of wounded men and the sobbing of frightened children. Ibrahim stood slowly, his body protesting every movement. He was covered in dust and stone chips, bleeding from a dozen minor cuts, his ears ringing from the gunfire. But he was alive, and more importantly, the children were still alive. He approached the barred door, and the children pressed forward to meet him, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The oldest, a girl of perhaps 12, spoke in a voice that trembled but refused to break. Are we free? Is it really over?" Ibrahim knelt down so he was at eye level with her, his voice gentle despite the harshness of their surroundings. "Yes, but freedom isn't just about opening this door. True freedom comes when you step outside, when you breathe fresh air and see the sun again. That's when it's truly over." He turned to examine the door's locking mechanism. It was complex, reinforced with multiple bolts and an electronic lock that had probably been scavenged from some military installation. But there, almost hidden in the corner, was the same symbol he had seen before, the 3 circles with the bird in the center. The parrot flew down and landed on Ibrahim's shoulder one final time. "The same key that opened the outer passages will open this door. Trust the symbol. Trust what brought you this far." Ibrahim placed his hand on the symbol, pressing it in the specific pattern the parrot had shown him earlier. There was a moment of resistance, then a series of mechanical clicks as hidden tumblers fell into place. The electronic lock disengaged with a soft beep, and the door swung slowly open. The children didn't rush out immediately. They stood frozen, as if unable to believe that their ordeal was truly ending. Then, slowly, they began to move. First one child stepped through the doorway, then another, and then they were all flooding out. Many crying, some laughing, all reaching for the soldiers who stood ready to help them. Ibrahim watched them emerge, feeling emotion threaten to overwhelm him. 50 lives, 50 futures that had been hanging in the balance, and now they were free. The parrot took flight from his shoulder, circling the chamber one final time before landing on a nearby rock. It looked at Ibrahim with those impossibly intelligent eyes and spoke one last time. "You see, Commander, one person, one act of courage can save so many lives. You could have turned back a dozen times when you first encountered me, at the tunnel entrance, when you faced the guards, when you disarmed that bomb. Any of those moments you could have chosen safety over duty, but you didn't. That's what makes you a hero." Ibrahim shook his head slowly. "I'm no hero. I'm just a soldier who couldn't live with himself if he'd walked away from children in danger." "That," the parrot said softly, "is exactly what a hero would say." The journey back through the tunnels and passages was slow, but filled with a quiet triumph that made every step feel lighter than it should have. The children were weak, many needing to be carried by the soldiers, but they were alive and growing stronger with each breath of increasingly fresh air as the group made their way toward the surface. Ibrahim walked near the rear of the column, his rifle still at the ready, despite the apparent safety. He had learned long ago never to assume victory until everyone was truly safe. The captured enemy commander and his surviving men were being marched in chains at the center of the group, guarded by soldiers whose expressions made it clear they would welcome any excuse to make the prisoners pay for their crimes. As they approached the final passage that would lead them out of the mine complex entirely, Ibrahim noticed that the quality of the air was changing. The stale, oppressive atmosphere of the underground was giving way to something fresher, cooler. Somewhere ahead, he could smell earth and growing things, the distinctive scent of the forest at night. Then they rounded a final corner, and there it was, the exit tunnel, leading upward toward the surface. And at the far end, barely visible but unmistakable, was the faint gray light of pre-dawn. The children saw it too. Many of them had spent weeks in captivity, some in total darkness, others in dim cells lit only by the occasional torch or battery-powered lamp. To see natural light again, even the weak glow of approaching sunrise, was like witnessing a miracle. One of the younger boys broke free from the soldier carrying him and ran toward the exit on legs that should have been too weak to support him. His momentum carried him forward, propelled by pure determination and the desperate need to be free of the underground prison that had held him. The children followed, and soon there was a stream of young people stumbling, running, crawling toward the exit and the promise of open sky beyond. The soldiers didn't try to stop them. They understood the psychological necessity of that rush toward freedom. Ibrahim emerged from the tunnel to find himself back in the forest, where his journey had begun so many hours ago. But everything looked different now. The darkness was retreating before the advance of dawn, and the eastern sky was beginning to show streaks of pink and gold. The air was cool and sweet, filled with the songs of birds welcoming the new day. The children spread out across the small clearing at the tunnel's mouth, many simply dropping to the ground and staring up at the sky as if they had never seen anything so beautiful. Some were laughing, others crying, and still others simply sat in silence, processing their sudden transition from captivity to freedom. A medic team that had been standing by moved among the children, checking for injuries and beginning the process of assessment and treatment. Water and emergency rations were distributed. Blankets appeared, wrapping around thin shoulders and providing comfort as much as warmth. Ibrahim stood slightly apart from the organized chaos, watching it all with a sense of profound satisfaction mixed with bone-deep exhaustion. He felt like he could sleep for a week, but his mind was still too alert, still processing everything that had happened. The parrot landed on a branch nearby, and for a long moment They simply looked at each other without speaking. Finally, Ibrahim broke the silence. "I never got a chance to ask you the most important question. Who are you? What are you? Because I've seen a lot of impossible things in my career, but a talking parrot who leads rescue missions is at the top of the list." The parrot tilted its head in that characteristic way birds have, and Ibrahim could have sworn he saw amusement in its eyes. Does it really matter? You could spend years trying to understand how a bird learned to speak, or why I chose to help, or what mysterious force sent me to you in that forest. Or you could simply accept that sometimes, when evil threatens innocent lives, the universe finds a way to fight back. Maybe I'm that way. Maybe that's all the explanation you need. Ibrahim considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I suppose you're right. In the end, the how and why matter less than the result. 50 children are alive because you appeared when you did. That's what matters." The parrot ruffled its feathers and prepared to take flight. "Take care of them, Commander. They've been through an ordeal that would break many adults. They'll need help, support, therapy to process what happened to them. Your job isn't over just because you got them out of that mine." "I know," Ibrahim said quietly. "I'll make sure they get everything they need. Every single one of them. That's a promise." The parrot spread its wings, the colorful feathers catching the growing light of dawn. "I believe you. That's why I chose you after all, because when you make a promise, you keep it." And with that, the bird launched itself into the air and flew away into the trees so quickly that within seconds, Ibrahim wasn't even sure which direction it had gone. A soldier approached, a young lieutenant with questions in his eyes. "Sir, who were you talking to just now?" Ibrahim looked at the spot where the parrot had been, then back at the lieutenant. "An ally who helped make all this possible, but I don't think you'd believe me if I told you the whole story." The lieutenant glanced at the children being cared for by the medical team, then at the captured enemy forces being secured for transport, and finally back at Ibrahim. "Sir, I've been in the military for 6 years, and I've learned that the truth is often stranger than any fiction we could imagine. If you say you had help from an unlikely source, I'm not going to question it. Results speak louder than explanations." Ibrahim smiled, the genuine smile he had managed in many hours. "That's wise thinking, Lieutenant. You'll go far with that attitude." As the sun finally broke free from the horizon, flooding the forest clearing with golden light, Ibrahim turned to watch the children. Many of them were lifting their faces toward the warmth, eyes closed, simply experiencing the sensation of sunlight on their skin after so long in darkness. A little girl no more than 7 years old approached him shyly. She was holding something in her hands, a small, colorful feather that must have fallen from the parrot during one of its flights. "Mister," she said in a small voice, "did an angel save us?" Ibrahim knelt down beside her, gently taking the feather and examining it. It was beautiful, iridescent blues and greens that shifted in the light. He handed it back to her carefully. "I think," he said slowly, "that angels come in all forms. Sometimes they look like we expect them to, sometimes they look very different. But they all have one thing in common. They appear when good people need help fighting against evil. So, yes, in a way, an angel did save us, and this feather is proof that miracles still happen in our world." The girl clutched the feather to her chest like a precious treasure and ran back to her friends to show them. The lieutenant returned, this time with a field radio. "Sir, Command is requesting a full situation report. They want to know status, casualty figures, and next steps." Ibrahim stood, feeling every ache and bruise in his body, making itself known now that the adrenaline was finally wearing off. "Tell them we have 50 rescued children, all alive, conditions ranging from fair to good. We have 17 enemy prisoners in custody, including their operational commander. 0 friendly casualties. Recommend immediate medical evacuation for the children and prisoner transport for the enemy forces. And tell them," he paused, looking at the rising sun, "tell them that today the good guys won." As the lieutenant moved away to relay the message, Ibrahim took one last look at the forest where his impossible journey had begun. Somewhere out there, a remarkable parrot was flying free, carrying secrets that Ibrahim suspected he would never fully understand. But that was okay. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. What mattered was the outcome: 50 children who would grow up to have futures, to have dreams, to become whatever they wanted to be. 50 lives that had been saved because one man had chosen to believe the impossible and had the courage to act on that belief. The community center in the capital city was filled with people. Parents reunited with their children, government officials present for the ceremony, journalists covering the story that had captured the nation's attention. But the focus of everyone's attention was on a stage where 50 children stood, dressed in their best clothes, many holding awards and certificates. They were the survivors, the 50 children who had been rescued from the mine. In the months since their ordeal, they had received medical care, counseling, and support to help them recover from their trauma. Some had healed faster than others, but all of them had shown remarkable resilience. Ibrahim sat in the audience, uncomfortable in his formal military dress uniform, watching as each child received recognition for their courage. He had tried to decline the invitation to this ceremony, feeling that the real heroes were the children themselves. But they had insisted he come. According to the organizers, the children had specifically requested his presence. When the awards were finished, the oldest girl, the one who had been the first to speak to Ibrahim when he had opened their prison door, approached the microphone. She was 12 years old, but she spoke with a maturity that belied her age. "We asked Commander Tarore to be here today because we wanted to say thank you, not just to him, but to everyone who helped rescue us, but especially to him because he's the one who never gave up even when it seemed impossible." She gestured to Ibrahim, and reluctantly he stood up. The applause was thunderous, making him deeply uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being celebrated. Soldiers did their duty, that was all. But then all 50 children began to sing. It was a song they had learned together during their recovery, a song about hope and courage and the light that comes after darkness. Their voices rose together, filling the hall with something that transcended mere music. Ibrahim felt tears sting his eyes, something that rarely happened to him. These children, who had every right to be broken, were instead standing strong, singing about hope. They had survived their ordeal and were determined to build good lives despite the trauma they had endured. After the ceremony, as people mingled and refreshments were served, Ibrahim found himself approached by the little girl who had asked him about angels. She was holding the same colorful feather, now preserved in a small frame that hung on a chain around her neck. "I still have it," she said proudly, showing him the feather. "I keep it with me always to remind me that miracles are real." Ibrahim smiled at her. "That's a good reminder to have. We all need to believe in miracles sometimes." "Commander," she asked, looking up at him with serious eyes, "the parrot who helped you, will we ever see it again?" Ibrahim considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But I think that bird appears when and where it's needed most. Perhaps right now it's helping someone else who needs it. And that's okay, because we're safe now. We don't need rescuing anymore. The girl thought about this, then nodded solemnly. I hope it helps lots more people. Everyone should have an angel when they need one. As Ibrahim left the ceremony later that evening, walking through the city streets back toward his barracks, he found himself looking up at the evening sky. Stars were beginning to appear as darkness fell, and somewhere a bird called out, though it was just an ordinary bird, not his unusual friend from the forest. He wondered where the parrot was now, whether it was helping someone else, whether he would ever encounter it again. Probably not, he decided. Some meetings in life are meant to be singular, remarkable events that change everything, but happen only once. But he would never forget. Every time he heard a bird call, saw colorful feathers, or encountered someone facing an impossible choice, he would remember that night in the forest when a talking parrot had demanded he follow it into darkness to save 50 innocent lives. And he would remember the most important lesson that experience had taught him, that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified, but moving forward anyway, because something more important than your own safety is at stake. The children were safe. They were healing. They had futures ahead of them full of possibilities. In the end, that was all that mattered. That was the true miracle. Not a talking bird, not the improbable success of the rescue, but the simple fact that good had triumphed over evil, that compassion had overcome cruelty, that 50 young lives had been saved and given the chance to flourish. As Ibrahim walked through the evening streets, he whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude to whatever power had sent that remarkable parrot to him in the forest. And somewhere, perhaps, the universe heard and was satisfied that its unlikely messenger had chosen well. The story of Commander Ibrahim Traore and the 50 children became legend in the years that followed. People told it to inspire courage, to remind themselves that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes, when darkness seems overwhelming, help arrives from the most improbable sources. And on quiet nights, when the wind rustles through the trees and birds settle in for sleep, some people swear they can hear an unusual voice carried on the breeze, a voice that sounds almost, but not quite, like a parrot, whispering words of encouragement to anyone brave enough to listen. Don't give up. Time may be short, but courage makes all things possible. Follow the light. Trust in goodness, and never, ever abandon those who need you. The end.